Clara looked out the window of the old house, watching the silent street stretch out before her eyes. There was no movement, only trees swaying gently in the wind, as if whispering ancient secrets. The neighborhood was quiet, secluded, as if the outside world had forgotten it existed. She needed that. She needed a new beginning, far from the painful memories that haunted her. The loss of her mother was still fresh in her mind. The illness that took her had been swift and cruel. There was nothing Clara could have done to stop it, but the pain of that loss, the hollow space it carved inside her, was something she still didn't know how to live with. The house she grew up in was now filled with too many memories, each room echoing with laughter and tender moments that had turned into ghosts of the past. That's why Clara made the decision to leave, to move into a house far from everything and everyone, where no one knew her, and where she might finally find peace. The house she bought was old, with peeling paint on the walls and a scent of aged wood lingering in the morning air. The space was far too big for one person, but that's exactly what she wanted, a place to breathe without being suffocated by grief. The moment she stepped inside, the sense of abandonment was palpable. Her footsteps echoed through the empty hallways. The long, narrow corridor seemed endless, and the closed doors gave the impression that the house had been waiting for something or someone. As she unpacked her belongings, Clara began to notice what made the house feel even stranger: the silence. It wasn't the usual kind, but something dense, heavy, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. She had the unmistakable feeling of being watched, though she couldn't tell from where. She tried to brush it off, blaming stress and the exhaustion of grieving. But the unease didn't leave her. That first night, while trying to sleep, Clara heard a distant sound, something like soft footsteps approaching her room. Her heart pounded. She got up and walked to the door, peeking into the hallway. But when she looked, no one was there. The corridor stood empty. Was it just an echo, or something more? If you're feeling the tension rising, subscribe now so you don't miss what's coming next. Clara shrugged it off and tried convincing herself it was only her imagination, a result of fatigue and loneliness. The next night, the footsteps returned. This time, Clara was more alert. She stayed in bed, listening closely, and heard it again. Footsteps. Slowly, she rose and moved to the hallway. The sound seemed to come from inside the wall. The house was full of creaks, old doors, groaning, floors, but this sound, this rhythmic pacing felt different, like someone or something was walking behind the walls, unseen but present. Clara tried to rationalize it. The house was old. Perhaps it was just the wooden beams shifting with the wind. But in those still nights, a part of her insisted it wasn't just that. Something was wrong. She could feel it deep down, like a cold breath on her neck. The silence began to feel more like a warning than a refuge. On the third night, as she tried to block out the noises that filled the empty space, Clara lay down and closed her eyes. Physical exhaustion took over, and she drifted into sleep. But she soon awoke with a jolt. Moonlight poured through the broken windows, casting pale light into the hallway. And that's when she saw it, a reflection. Near the bedroom door, the old mirror hanging on the wall showed a vague figure. Clara stood up cautiously, not wanting to believe her eyes. She approached, trying to understand what she was seeing. As she got closer, the image in the mirror vanished, a blurred motion, gone. But what she'd seen before it disappeared sent chills down her spine. The sense of being watched grew stronger. Clara scanned the house, searching for some logical explanation. But no matter how hard she tried to deny it, the invisible presence felt closer each night. The doors remained closed, the hallways dark, but something was hiding behind them. something she could almost feel breathing in the silence. What do you think Clara is really sensing? Share your theory in the comments before we reveal more. She was alone, no doubt about that, but the house's stillness was becoming more and more unnerving. The closed doors and long hallways seemed to guard more than just rooms. They held something she couldn't yet comprehend. And though she kept pushing those thoughts away, a part of her knew something was deeply wrong with this house. Something her mother might have known about long before her, and now Clara was about to find out what had truly been waiting for her here. To believe that the strange events she had experienced were nothing more than her overwhelmed mind playing tricks on her. She had moved far away from the city to find peace after her mother's death, and she knew she was dealing with deep, unprocessed grief. Maybe the house, so old and filled with shadows, was merely reflecting what she already carried inside. Still, she kept trying to move on, but on the fourth night, she found something that shattered every rational explanation. Clara had gone to the attic to retrieve a few boxes left in an old closet. As she rummaged through the dust-covered piles, her eyes landed on a small wooden chest, so old that the hinges groaned at her touch. The carved designs along its edges were intricate, unfamiliar. A shiver ran down her spine as her fingers brushed the surface. Something deep inside her whispered that this chest was connected to her mother, something she had never known. With a shaky breath, Clara opened the lid. Inside, beneath old papers and faded photographs, lay a small journal tied with a red ribbon. She hesitated, but curiosity and instinct pushed her forward. She untied the ribbon and opened it. The pages were yellowed with time, and the delicate handwriting left no doubt. This journal had belonged to her mother. The first entries were light, filled with reflections about everyday life, gardening, quiet afternoons. Her mother wrote about the joy of watching Clara grow, how she loved their little rituals. But as the pages turned, a shift occurred. The warmth began to fade, replaced by worry, dread, and eventually fear. There were vague references to a shadow in the house, a presence her mother couldn't quite name. It wasn't constant, but when the house fell silent, she could feel it watching. The house is full of echoes, one entry read. But there's something more than echoes, a presence. Sometimes, I'm sure I'm not alone. Clara froze. She read the sentence over and over again. Her mother had felt it too. All the strange sensations Clara had tried to ignore, the footsteps, the glances over her shoulder, the whisper of unease, weren't just figments of her grieving mind. They were real. Her mother had lived with this same discomfort and never said a word. Why hadn't she ever told Clara? Why keep something like this secret? The next day, Clara couldn't ignore it anymore. She explored the house room by room, hoping that in the daylight she could disprove what she felt. But something had changed. In the attic, bathed in golden morning light, she heard them again. Footsteps, light, measured, deliberate. She rushed to the hallway, heart pounding, but again found nothing. The house was still, too still. She turned slowly toward the mirror. At the end of the hall, something inside her resisted the urge to look, but her feet moved anyway. The mirror had always given her a strange feeling, more than old glass should. And now, standing before it, something shifted. Her reflection flickered. And then she saw her mother, not in the way she remembered her, warm and smiling, but pale, almost translucent, staring straight back at her with hollow, desperate eyes. Clara gasped and stepped back, blinking. The image vanished. The mirror only showed herself again, face pale with shock. If this mystery has pulled you in like it did Clara, leave a like and help us reach more curious minds. Clara's breath caught in her throat. Her heart pounded in her ears as she stumbled back from the mirror, searching the shadows for some logical explanation. But she knew what she had seen. The reflection hadn't been her imagination. Her mother had been there. But the look on her face, hollow, twisted by pain, wasn't one of comfort. It was something else, a plea, or maybe a warning. That night, the presence in the house grew heavier. Clara sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the cracks in the ceiling, trying to calm the tremble in her hands. She could hear something moving, again, slow, deliberate steps, the kind of pacing that made the silence louder. It wasn't just footsteps anymore. It was whispers, faint, indecipherable words, like someone speaking from the other side of a wall too thick to penetrate. But she knew that voice. It was her mother's. Twisted, but still recognizable, the voice whispered her name. Clara didn't move. She closed her eyes tightly, as if shutting them would block out the sound. But the voice grew clearer, closer. It wasn't comforting. It was desperate and filled with sorrow. The next day, Clara couldn't focus. She wandered the house like a ghost herself. Something was wrong, deeply wrong. She tried to read more of the journal, hoping to find answers, but the pages became erratic, ink smudged. That afternoon, Clara climbed into the attic once more. She had to know more. As she shifted boxes aside, she found a second, smaller book tucked inside a loose floorboard. It wasn't like the first. This one was different, hand-bound, with twine, older, heavier. Its pages were written in the same delicate script, but the tone was darker, rushed, afraid. "I made a mistake," it read. "I asked for time, but the price was too high." Clara's blood ran cold. Her mother had made some kind of bargain, a deal with, what? A spirit? A force? The journal didn't say directly, but the implication was clear. Her mother had asked for something, life, time, a second chance, and the house had answered, but it hadn't come freely. The footsteps, the voice, the mirror, they weren't random. They were signs. Clara hadn't just inherited an old house, she had inherited a curse. And whatever her mother had tried to keep hidden all these years was no longer hiding. The pieces were beginning to fit, but the full picture still eluded her. The journal ended abruptly, with one last line scrawled in shaking letters. "If she finds this, I'm sorry." Clara closed the book with trembling her. The air inside the house felt heavier with each passing day. The nights grew longer and lonelier, and the sensation of being watched never left Clara. As she continued reading her mother's journal, the signs became clearer. Her mother hadn't just been tormented. She had been afraid, deeply afraid, and that fear had taken root in the walls of the house. Near the end of one of the entries, Clara found a particularly disturbing note. Her mother mentioned a dark figure that lingered in the house, something she never dared describe in detail. One sentence stood out, underlined in red ink. She promised protection, but the price was steep. Now she's come to collect. This house will never know peace, and maybe neither will I. Clara's stomach tightened as she read those words. At first, she didn't understand, but the pieces slowly began to fall into place. Her mother hadn't just been tormented, she had entered into an agreement, a pact. With whom or what, Clara didn't yet know. But the presence that haunted the house was no accident. It had a purpose. She needed to know more. Clara returned to the attic, certain that the answers were there. This time, she wasn't searching boxes aimlessly. She dug deeper, following an intuition she couldn't explain. Behind a shelf covered in cobwebs, she found a pile of old papers and documents, hidden and yellowed with age. Among them, she discovered a letter, handwritten and signed by someone who had apparently lived in the house long before her mother. The letter spoke of a woman, a mysterious, unnamed figure who appeared during times of great sorrow, and offered what people most wanted: time, second chances, even life. But nothing she offered came without a cost. The letter didn't describe her appearance. It didn't need to. The dread in the words was enough to make Clara's skin crawl. She finds those who are ready to give anything, the letter read. but what she takes in return is never what they expect. If this mystery has pulled you in like it did Clara, leave a like and help us reach more curious minds. As Clara finished reading, the mirror at the far end of the attic caught her eye. A strange light shimmered across its surface. Although no light source was near, she approached slowly, heart pounding. This mirror, she now realized, had been in the house far longer than any of the furniture. She ran her fingers along its edge. It felt warm, almost alive. When she looked into it, her own reflection stared back. Nothing unusual. But then, for a brief moment, her reflection changed. It wasn't just her in the glass. Behind her stood a figure, dark and faceless, with hands stretched forward as if trying to reach through the surface. She turned quickly. No one was there. She backed away, breath quickening, her eyes never leaving the mirror. It had shown her something, a glimpse of the thing her mother had feared. And now it was showing itself to Clara. That night, Clara barely slept. Every creak in the floor, every shifting shadow seemed louder, darker, more menacing. The silence in the house no longer felt empty. It felt full. The walls, the floor, the air, all of it seemed to pulse with an invisible presence. She read the letter again, then returned to the journal, hoping for something, anything that might offer clarity. In a final entry, hastily scribbled and smeared, her mother had written, "I thought I could protect her. I was wrong. She will come for Clara too. The only way to stop her is to break the mirror." Clara froze. The mirror. It wasn't just a reflection of the past. It was a portal, a tether. Somehow, it connected the entity to this world. But destroying it wouldn't be simple. Her mother had tried and failed, or worse, had never dared. Determined, Clara went back to the attic. The mirror waited for her like an open wound. As she stood in front of it once more, the reflection shifted again. Her mother appeared this time. Not the twisted figure she had seen before, but her real mother, tired, sad, trapped. She raised a hand slowly, placing it against the inside of the glass. Clara mirrored the gesture, her hand trembling. Tears welled up in her eyes. "Mom?" she whispered. The image said nothing. It only looked back at her with pleading eyes, silently begging for freedom. Then behind her mother, the dark figure returned, looming, pulsing with rage. Clara stumbled back. The truth was clear now. Her mother hadn't died in peace. She had been consumed. The entity had not let her go. And now Clara was next. She ran to the basement, searching for tools, anything. She didn't care if it sounded insane. She would destroy the mirror. She would break the chain. She would end whatever it was that haunted the house and her family for good. Curious what? Price was paid in exchange for time? Subscribe now and don't miss the moment Clara uncovers the truth. Clara could no longer deny what was happening. The fear that once clawed at the edges of her mind now loomed fully in front of her. The unease that had followed her since she entered the house had turned into something solid, something ancient, and it was watching her. But along with the fear came something else. Resolve. She couldn't run, not now. Whatever had started with her mother had reached its climax, and she was the only one who could end it. That morning, the house felt different. The air was thick, almost suffocating, as if the walls themselves were pulsing. Every sound echoed with a strange delay, like the house was distorting time itself. The light coming through the windows was duller, tinted with something unnatural. Clara felt her skin prickle. The house was alive, and it was waiting. She returned to the attic, to the mirror, to the heart of it all. But this time, she didn't go as a frightened observer. She came as someone who knew the truth. Her mother's soul was trapped. The entity had latched onto their family, fed by pain, regret, and broken promises. Clara was part of that now, but she didn't have to be. As she stood before the mirror, she whispered, "You don't own me." The reflection didn't change this time, not immediately, but then the glass began to shimmer. Slowly, her mother's face appeared, clearer than ever. She looked exhausted, her skin pale and translucent, her eyes swollen with unshed tears. Behind her, the dark figure loomed like smoke, moving with unnatural fluidity. It pressed close, as if absorbing her. Clara's hand trembled as she reached for the hammer she had brought with her. Her mother opened her mouth as if trying to speak, but no words came out. Only her eyes moved, begging. The mirror's surface began to ripple. A soft humming noise filled the attic, growing louder and deeper with each second. The presence was there, nearer than ever. Clara knew this was her only chance. She lifted the hammer, hesitated for a breath, and then swung it with all the force she had. The mirror shattered. A deafening shriek echoed through the house, vibrating through the floorboards, the walls, even through Clara's bones. The shards of glass hovered in the air for a moment before bursting into a whirlwind of energy. A blast of icy wind hit her chest, and she collapsed to the floor. Then silence, complete and absolute. When Clara opened her eyes, the attic was still. The light returned to normal. The mirror was gone. Only its iron frame remained, scorched and hollow. She stood slowly, her body shaking. Had she done it? Was it over? Suddenly, the entire house began to tremble. Books fell from shelves. Light fixtures swung violently. The floor cracked beneath her feet. The entity hadn't been destroyed. It had been released. Clara ran down the stairs as the walls groaned and split open. The house was collapsing, not physically, but spiritually. Everything that had been hidden was surfacing. The screams of the past, the sorrow sealed in the walls, the weight of decades, it all poured out at once. In the living room, she fell to her knees. A whirlwind of shadows spun around her. In the center, she saw her mother, her real mother, standing tall, bathed in a soft light. She looked peaceful. Finally, her lips moved. "Thank you." The shadow shrieked in rage. The entity surged one last time, but Clara faced it. She wasn't afraid anymore. "You've taken enough," she said aloud. "Now you let us go." With those words, the wind ceased. The shadows dispersed. The house let out a final sigh, as if releasing the breath it had been holding for decades. If this moment gave you chills, leave a like and help this story reach others who crave the same dark thrill. Silence returned, but this time it was calm, free. Clara stood in the doorway, looking back at the home that had changed her forever. It was no longer dark or twisted. It was still, empty. The war was over. She walked out into the first rays of sunlight, barefoot, covered in dust, but her heart was light. The curse was broken, her mother was free, and so was she. Don't miss what comes after the silence. Subscribe now to follow Clara's final steps toward healing. Clara sat on the cold floor of the living room, staring at the scattered remains of what had once been the mirror. The first light of morning crept through the dusty windows, bathing the room in a muted gold. The silence was different now. It no longer carried the weight of something lurking. It was light, still, honest. She felt the pulse of her own breath, steady but unfamiliar. The presence that had loomed over the house was gone. And yet a strange emptiness had taken its place. Clara had freed her mother. She had broken the curse, but something in her chest still ached, not from fear, but from the weight of finality. She stood slowly, her body sore, her spirit hollowed out. All around her, the house was still. The air no longer felt oppressive, and the walls no longer whispered. It was over, but the memory of what had happened here would never leave her. Clara moved from room to room one last time. In each corner, she paused, not in fear, but in quiet. Farewell. The ghosts were gone. But their echoes would remain. The house no longer belonged to them. It no longer belonged to her either. Outside, the world had not changed. The trees still stood, the sun still rose, birds still called out into the new day. But Clara had changed. She had crossed a line few ever find and fewer return from. And yet, she had survived. At the front door, she looked back once more. The house stood still, stripped of its darkness, but also of its warmth. It had served its purpose, and she had fulfilled hers. If you've followed Clara's journey this far, leave a comment sharing what this ending meant to you. She stepped outside and felt the earth under her feet, solid, grounding, alive. The morning light kissed her skin, and a gentle breeze brushed her hair. She didn't know what came next. She only knew she was free to find out. The streets were quiet as she walked. For the first time, she wasn't walking to escape something behind her. She was walking towards something ahead. A future untethered, a life no longer haunted. The past would always be part of her. Her mother would live on in her memories, in her strength, but she no longer carried it like a weight. Now it was a whisper, a part of her story, not the whole of it. If this story moved you, subscribe now. More tales like Clara's await beyond the quiet. She didn't look back again.